Welcome to Invest Well, Be Well, a podcast for wiser investing and stronger living. I'm Rusty Vanneman, longtime investment professional, and I'm joined each week by my co-host, Robin Murray.
Thanks, Rusty. I'm a storyteller and journalist, and I am so excited to explore the ideas, insights, and people shaping the intersection of performance and purpose.
This podcast is for thoughtful investors and driven professionals who want to grow in their portfolios and in their personal lives.
We'll talk long-term investing, behavioral finance, personal development, and what it takes to live and work with intention.
So let's get started. Let's invest well and be well together.
This podcast is brought to you by Main Management LLC. Since 2002, Main has been recognized as an ETF strategist that combines an institutional process with the personalized service of a boutique firm. Our guest today is Dick Fredericks. He is a founding partner of Main Management, a former U.S. ambassador, a board member of the Library of Congress Trust Fund, and all-around fascinating person. I mean, this was a great interview, Rusty.
Fascinating is an understatement. And I mean, in terms of his resume, I had to write a bunch of stuff down here. There's so much. It just kept going on and on and on. So first of all, being an ambassador, he has a little anecdote about Bill Clinton, like early in his college career, which is a real interesting way to start the podcast. It was really great. But again, he works at Main Management. He a sponsor of this podcast. He serves as managing director of the investment committee. So every day he's contributing. And that's an amazing, particularly when you hear this wisdom in this podcast. Something else I think that really stands out, because I wanted to be this at one point in my career, is he was one of the most respected research analysts on Wall Street in the banking sector. And that's actually the industry I wanted to get into right out of college. And you hear in the distinction of all-American analyst from institutional investor for 17 consecutive years. That is like an amazing stat. But anyway, later he did serve as a U.S. ambassador to Switzerland, and he was known for a lot of different things, but it's all the little things he did too, such as hosting unforgettable dinners with the help of a Michelin-trained chef. And anyway, it goes beyond finance and diplomacy. He's a huge reader, which we'll get into, with so many book ideas. So people probably, if you're a reader, you might want to take some notes on this podcast. He's involved with Library of Congress, as you mentioned. He's passionate about wine. He's both a grower for Turley Wine Cellars, and he's also involved with Chambers and Chambers. He's a dedicated family man, deep roots in Michigan. We don't talk about that here, but also the athletic achievements within his own family are really amazing. And, we didn't have time to get into that. I really kind of felt like, we needed another podcast with Dick Fredericks. What were some of your takeaways?
Yes, another podcast, or like a series of 10 podcasts, I think would have been.
I know.
Yeah, he has had such a fascinating life, and he had just so much wisdom and so much that we can learn from him and his life and his experience. I think, as you mentioned, he's such a voracious reader, and he talked about that a lot. He talked about reading deeply, which I just thought is an interesting way to think about that. He gave us the quote of, "A man who reads lives 1,000 lives." And I'm also really jealous. I know he's 80 years old, so he's put his time in, but I'm really jealous of his schedule, which basically includes reading, then going for a walk, and then reading some more. I know. So much pure gold in this. And as you said, just so much wisdom. He had great quotes, great stories, great action items. Just a couple teases. Something you need to listen for is his favorite how-to book. You get a gold star if you can pronounce it, because I can't. But then also what he personally wrote for his children, and it's what he called his Baker's Dozen on Wisdom, Another Keeper. Yes, and he choked up when talking about the Declaration of Independence, which I just think was such a touching moment and really sweet. Yeah, it was a great interview. Well, let's get to it. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Invest Well, Be Well. Dick, we have a lot of great questions for you. I think this interview, doing our research, there's so many things we could ask you, but our very first question is our standard question for all of our guests, and we need a walk-up song to set the tone for the interview. What is your walk-up song?
Well, Rusty, you hinted at this thing, and you also noted that it's hard for people to do, and I found that absolutely to be the case.
Yep.
I have about 5 of them I could rattle off, and there's different walk-up songs for different reasons.
We'll take all 5. We have a playlist. We like expanding it.
But I did hone it down to one. And what I was thinking about, it had to have a big start. It had to be something that that would engender both fun and energy.
Yeah.
And I used to run a lot. Now I have two false knees and hip, and so I don't run. But when I used to hear the Rocky theme song, pumped me up with energy, and it was good to go. But to name the other ones, there's one that I'm sure that nobody's ever thought about on your podcast. It was the theme song of the 1996 Lillehammer Olympics called "Fire in Your Heart," sung by a woman named Sissel Shishibu. Try to spell that one. And it's a beautiful song, but sung by a beautiful lady with beautiful words. And it was the whole inspiration of the Lillehammer Olympics. That was one. Another one would be the theme song from the original Maverick movie.
Oh, yeah.
Another one would be Happy Oregon, Walk Don't Run. And those are some of the names.
I don't know, Robin. I'm fired up already.
We can add all of those to our playlist.
I know some of them are not on your list.
Yeah, those are awesome.
That's great. All right. Well, now that we've set the tone, let's talk about you and your very remarkable career, which is so interesting. It's been included everything from leading research on banks and financial services. You co-founded Main Management. You served as U.S. ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein. So looking back over that varied career, what guiding principles have driven your decisions across such different areas?
Well, this probably is not something you would think about. This is not a typical answer. My first job was on Wall Street. We had a family company, and my dad always wanted me to come back to that company. And I thought, no, I went to Columbia Business School, and I thought that I would like to learn the investment business, and I thought I could always go back to the family company. Well, one of those love affairs. Once I started, I'd never turned back. But part of that, in terms of decision making, was something that might surprise you. Probably the one really thing that I learned from statistics was minimax, how to minimize your downside and enhance your upside. And in the case of going to work on Wall Street, the downside risk was low and the upside was big. I had nothing to lose, everything to gain. So it comes down to that. And essentially, I like change, I like challenge, and so those played a role in all the changes you've seen in my background. And another thing was, I really believe, there was a lot of changes, and sometimes I was ready. And if I thought I was ready, I had no problem asking for the order. No problem. There's an expression, no harm in asking. And I'd go back to that mini-max, and it's all about probabilities. Even becoming an ambassador, I knew that I had a good shot because a personal friend of mine that I've known since he was 17 is a guy named Bill Clinton. He was literally the first person I ever met in college. I met him before I opened my suitcase, and he was walking into the room saying, "Hi, I'm Bill Clinton. I want to run for president of the class." So, I knew him, and I knew that he wanted me to work in the administration in different aspects. So I knew that I was at least on his radar, and I've known him, since he was 17. So that gets down to probabilities, and each step built on the last one, and I was willing to take on change and challenge, and I always loved doing it.
Love that answer. I love the game theory with Minimax. And Robin, I think we're off to a really good start on some good stories and anecdotes here. But so the tagline for our podcast is wiser investing and stronger living. So I'm going to cut to the chase on one question, and that is in terms of wiser investing. And given your decades of experience, what do you believe makes a truly wise investor today?
Well, there's a lot of words that everybody would throw around in that one. You want to be patient investor, you want to be a disciplined investor, you want to do deep research, and I believe in all this stuff. I believe in long-term orientation, but a lot of people will say that. And by the way, in terms of long-term orientation, I was a bank analyst. I know you know that. I've owned Wells Fargo since 1974. So I am, by that definition, I'm a long-term investor. So now 50 years, and my cost is less than the dividend. I love to let compounding work. And so I believe in long-term investing. I believe in compounding. Einstein's theory that it's the eighth wonder of the world. I strongly believe in that. But along the way, you've got to have humility and you've got to learn from your mistakes. And I find it interesting, while I'm a long-term investor, and there's the Nike thing, just do it. And I find sometimes when I interview kids, they say, I want to go on Wall Street. Well, have you owned a stock? No. What have you read? And, they haven't read anything. Well, it's the same thing literally with investors. A lot of people, think they're managing money and they barely own anything in their own account. You've got to be in the game. And so in a way, while I'm a long-term investor, I do have a pocket of short-term stuff because it just keeps me active. I could sit there and, look at Wells Fargo every day and I don't do anything. I'll probably die with the stock, but I'll buy options on stocks that I know well, and you learn from that. And I sat next to a fellow by the name of John Gruber, who was the biggest trigger happy guy I've ever seen, but he'd have confirms on his desk this high, and that's not my way, but he could sense a market turn and those sorts of things because he was in the market. He was doing it and learning it. So you've got to be in, you've got to be active, you've got to do it.
So I want to talk about the banking analyst role you had. And again, during those years, one of the most respected banking analysts. In fact, for nearly 2 decades in a row, you were the Institutional Investor All-American. And if I could, I would underscore that, bold-face it. I mean, that's just an amazing statistic. So I have to ask, and we don't usually ask these type of questions on this podcast, but what do you think about the financial sector today? And related to that, what do you think is misunderstood about banks and their role in the economy?
Well, banks have always been the transmission mechanism of the economy. It's the blood in the vein. They're the intermediary. They've always been there, but we've had this disjointed banking system, which now is being resolved. When I was in it, I think it was 14,000 banks. Now we're much, much, much lower than that. So one of the things that's going on now, one is a rationalization of the entire industry. That's through M&A. Another thing is, this is an investment term, there's survival bias. It used to be that if you would earn 1% on assets in a bank, you basically had to do one thing really well. Well, a lot of those one things really well banks went away. You've got to be very well run to be a real leader in the banking industry now. But what's going on currently that kind of gets people excited is that the regulatory relief is coming. Banks are overcapitalized. And I used to say that strong capital was a risk reduction method, but we went too far. So one of the things that's influencing banks now is this regulatory relief, not only on capital, but on rules. And then again, the survivor bias is produced better names. And the M&A is some takeover ability in the banks. And so, it's not like owning a tech stock. These are the tortoises, but they perform well and they're steady Eddie and with good returns on equity. And with this regulatory relief, less capital means higher ROE and the M&A potential. So that's why actually we're overweighted at Main Management.
So in your career, you've really been at the intersection of Wall Street, Washington, and global business, right? So how does that perspective shape the way that you think about diversification, risk, and opportunity for investors today?
Well, one thing I'll start off is answers none of those questions. What you realize when you go through all of those sectors, people are people. People are fallible. They make mistakes. The old expression, you put your pants on one leg at a time, and you realize that, nobody's got the ultimate edge. Now, you mentioned diversification. I do believe that's the one free lunch in investing. It's powerful. It protects you. So I believe strongly in diversification. And when you've been in those spheres, you tend to see, and you'll hear me talk maybe later about pattern recognition, and that comes from reading a lot, but you begin to see patterns, and patterns do cross over from Wall Street to Washington to global businesses. And so you can learn from that. I think you can also learn about the money flows that go around the world. And one of the things that I see all the time and you can apply this to many things, is something called Amara's Law. Amara, can't remember the guy's first name, but Amara's Law basically said the near term is overhyped and the long term is underappreciated. And you can almost think about that right now with AI. Huge hype. And by the way, AI went all the way back to the late 60s. And the first meetings was in Dartmouth, I think in 1968. So, you have this initial hype and then a rollover and then a big upswing, and it becomes an overnight success. But I see Amara's Law not only in investing, but just the way governments are run, the way policy is made, et cetera. And I see that everywhere. I don't know if that's really answering your question, but I can see the crossover everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to ask you about a venture capital firm called Track that you're the chair of. Super interesting. You shared the story with us when we were preparing for this podcast. But first, as you said, it has more data scientists than any other type of employee. And it was founded after you examined your own record of investing and essentially tried to figure out the formula for success, right? So tell us about Track and what it's all about.
Well, that humility part comes in right there. I looked at my record, and, I've been on, in and around Wall Street for now pushing, I hate to say it, 60 years. And so if you guys came to me and said, I have this really great idea, this great company, it's an up and coming private company, and you hear that on Wall Street, you have that opportunity. But those are all one-offs. They're one-off. They depend on what part of the cycle you're in. It depends on what kind of company it's in, all kinds of things like that. And because they're one-offs, it's really a shotgun. And so I looked at my own portfolio, and I had some, winners, and for sure I had some losers. And I kept thinking there's got to be a better way. I know two people here in Sonoma. One started a company back in as far back as 2013, using then what was called big data or collective intelligence, which really is AI. And he was able to predict whether a seed round company would ever make it to the A round. That's a massive advantage. My other friend wanted to figure out who the heck is the Warren Buffett of VC. So he had his own data about trying to figure out who the best of the best is. And both were following something which I had read years ago called Super Forecasters by a guy named Tetlock at the University of Pennsylvania. And basically, Tetlock would say and this goes back to investing again, the best investors are polymaths. They read everything, and again, I bring in pattern recognition, et cetera, and that. But anyway, all three of us had read that book. So I convinced these two guys to put that together. We have data on over 300,000 early stage investors who have done collectively about 1.5 million rounds of financing. And now we have the data that we can figure out who the best of the best of the best is. And one of our algorithms, because it's all done by AI, is if one of these super forecaster types, which we define as in the top 0.1% of 1%, if they are investors, we better be looking at that. So it's a tip. And by the way, if you're in the top 0.5% of 1% of these 300,000 your average return is over 60 times your money. That's a set of partners I'd like to be hanging around with. We amalgamate all that, and we keep getting better and better and better through AI, and we don't have an investment committee. It's AI that's telling us where to go.
Huh. Wow. I have a feeling that every one of the questions we ask could be a whole podcast in its own, and the next question is going to be like that. I definitely want to know about your experiences being an ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, but in terms of all that experience as an ambassador, how did that inform the way you invest, lead, and live?
Well, first of all, when you go to a different country, and I've been to many countries because of Wall Street, you go around and see clients here and there. But when you go live there, you got to have an open mind. They're going to teach you a lot of stuff, and you don't know really a lot about it. You fly into a country, you go to a hotel, see a client and get back on the plane and go, oh, living there is an eye-opener. And you've got to be open to ideas and open to different views than you'd have on your own. Relative to Switzerland, there's a lot of, I'd say really fun element to it. Well, first of all, in terms of how I led, I really believe in transparency. There's a certain thing called a country team where literally you go into a room and we would sweep it before we would go into it because we don't want the world listening into these conversations because they're high level State Department stuff. But having said that, I broke almost every rule by bringing many, many more people into that room than normal because I wanted people to understand what we were trying to accomplish. I wanted them to tell me what they were hearing, etc. So that's always been a leadership thing of mine. In fact, I learned something the first day. This is a fun story. I always wanted to be a bartender. I never have been, but I always wanted to be one. So the Marines had a bar, and when the money they made on that would go to the Marines ball at the end of the year. Well, the very first Friday I was there, I got behind the bar, and I was serving drinks to the people, in the embassy. And that, they always said, first moves ripple through. That ripped through the thing because here I was, sleeves rolled up, serving the guys who were working for me. I didn't really think I was doing something special, but boy, did I hear about that later. That nobody had ever done that before, and it set a tone, and it's those little things that make a difference. And I always wanted to make sure that my people knew where my thinking was. We were trying to go. The same thing with the people we were trying to visit. I would go to the various cantons in Switzerland and let people know what the embassy is all about, what we're trying to accomplish. It all gets into transparency and that sort of thing.
Well, let's stay on leadership for another question here. So you've served on an extraordinary number of boards, from universities to technology ventures to wine cellars. What are some of the common threads that you've seen in successful leadership and decision-making across such diverse organizations?
Well, it absolutely always starts with one word: character. Always, always, always. You can also say integrity, character. I view those as the same. A leader or a CEO has got to have intelligence. They certainly have to have, in my mind, energy, because you're going to try to, you're going to be the lead. You got to have that energy. You've got to have curiosity. You got to have some kind of vision. It's the old elevator analysis. If you can't tell people what you want to do in about 5 sentences, how are they going to follow you? Otherwise it's a confused message. So you got to have that vision. You heard me talk about transparency in Switzerland. I'd also say a couple of other things would be, you got to be able to explain or live a culture that you want, and you've got to be fair. People know when you're not fair. So those are the ones. And interestingly, I remember Warren Buffett used to say he'd start with character, and then he had intelligence. But he said if he didn't have character, he wanted somebody who was basically dumb, because otherwise they're going to take you to the cleaners. And that dumb and somebody that didn't have intelligence, then they're going to cheat and steal from you. So you had to have somewhat of a combination of those. I don't know if I got the Buffett thing right, but it's along those lines.
No, I think it's on the right track. Yep, definitely.
Well, before we move on, tell us more about Turley Wine Cellars. Our listeners obviously cannot see you right now, but you have a background of a beautiful wine farm in the valley over there. And I think you're a board member at Turley, and maybe have some other involvement as well. How did that come about, and what has the experience been like?
So let's see. I've been married 43 years next month. Right before I got married, I bought a really small vineyard with a partner of mine at my old firm, Montgomery Securities. We went to a party in Napa Valley. It was spectacular. The two of us were talking about it. He and I would say, would you think about buying a place around here? And I said, absolutely. We own one the next week. It was in the right place, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so he got married. We got married. We wanted our own place. And so in 2005, we bought the place where I'm actually living full-time now, which is in Sonoma. And it's the oldest hillside vineyard in California. It was planted initially before California was a state. It's now on its second planting, and it's nearly 90 years old. the second plant. Anyway, when I saw it was Zinfandel, my favorite Zinfandel at the time was Turley Zinfandel. And I, again, I no harm in asking. I called up Larry Turley and said, let's have lunch. Because I wanted to convince him to buy my grapes. And then I ended up going on his wife's board, which is called Chambers and Chambers. That's the other one you were alluding to. Chambers and Chambers is importer distributor from wines all over the world where they sell into California and Hawaii. What a great company. You travel all around the world, sell it to people in California, go over to Hawaii, sell it to people there. Anyway, and then I went on Larry's board as well. So I have a 360-degree view of the wine industry, which is a lot of fun. I might add, though, the wine industry is not doing too well right now. But that's how I got involved. I love Larry Turley and his wife, Suzanne. It's been, a great deal of fun for me. And my hope is I add something to the equation.
That's pretty cool. So something else about you, you're also known as a voracious reader. You studied some of the greatest books of Western civilization. Yeah. And you serve as a member of the Trust Fund Board of the Library of Congress. So how has that knowledge and experience shaped your outlook on life, investing, and personal fulfillment?
Well, for starters, the Trust Fund Board of the Library of Congress is an honor to serve on. I've been running the endowment there since 2008, and they have everything. They have 170 million items in the Library of Congress. If you want to find something out, it's there. But having said that, I believe, and I've always believed, and this goes into reading, that you want to read, and I would emphasize the word read deeply. When you read, you're better at critical reasoning or critical thinking. You're better at problem solving. You're better at I'd say creativity, perspective. There's a wonderful quote saying, "A man who reads lives 1,000 lives, and one who doesn't lives one," which I really like a lot. So I really believe in reading deeply, and it just has been a match and having to be involved with the Library of Congress. Here I am doing something that I do as a vocation, which is helping to manage money, and I oversee this is now $300 million at the Library of Congress. And by the way, I followed one of the true icons of investing, Peter Lynch. That scared the hell out of me, following him to run the endowment. I don't know if you know who he is, Robin, but he ran the biggest fund at Fidelity and is considered one of the great investors of all time.
That is tough to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned before the notion of pattern recognition.
Yeah.
When you read really deeply, you begin to see patterns all over the place. And this goes back, and you start off by saying, I've read some of the great books, and I have, and I'm sure we'll talk about Oxford. But when you read people like Aristotle or Adam Smith, I have something I consider a virtuous circle. And I see this everywhere. Maybe you can call it pattern recognition. Maybe you can call it life. This really goes right back to Adam Smith. Division of labor. When I give speeches, sometimes I have this really goofy picture of Adam and Eve. Well, Adam and Eve started division of labor. Adam would go out to get protein, and Eve would be there with the grains. So they would divide their labor. From that comes specialization. From specialization comes innovation. And from innovation comes time saved. And time saved is money. I mean, that's productivity. It's growth. That's the fun stuff that I see when I read. I see that pattern everywhere, and call it pattern recognition, but that's part of that same thing. That my answer.
Yeah. Well, Dick, you are right. My next question is on your experience at Oxford University. So you went to Oxford University to complete a course that you designed on the moral philosophers who influenced our founding fathers. Tell listeners more about that experience.
I went to Georgetown and then Columbia Business School. But on my 25th reunion at Georgetown, I'm sure like a lot of people, I've been generous, and I think, well, where the hell does money go? I have no idea. It's a black hole. Does it do any good or not? I presume it does. So I thought, no, I'm no longer going to write the generic check. So I seeded, it was my idea, a scholarship that didn't have a lot of money in it, but it was from Georgetown to Oxford to Trinity College at Oxford. The only reason I had it to Oxford is because I had always heard it was the best university in the world. So it was all reputation. Trinity College at Oxford was because I had a client who I thought went to Trinity College at Oxford. Turns out she went to New College at Oxford, so I goofed that part up. In any event, I also told Georgetown they got to be twice a year to figure out who the Fredericks scholar was. What was really interesting was this is a cool program and other people will give money to it. They do. There are now 25 kids a year that go to Oxford in the summer, not all on our largesse. Many, many people are now donating this thing. So it's been a successful program. And one of the deans at Georgetown said people are applying to Georgetown to go on that program. So then the next step was, I thought over the years, well, I'd like to go on my own program. I want to study. And my first thought was to study history through the eyes of a Brit. But then I've had a love affair with our two primary documents, the Declaration of Independence. I'll get choked up on this, but anyway, Declaration and the Constitution. Those are beautiful, beautiful documents, and they're brief. The Declaration of Independence is only 1,320 words, and only 700 words were really the ones that Jefferson wrote with the towering capability, the way he writes. And then the Constitution is only 43 or 4,500 words, 42 to be exact. And they are incredibly beautiful documents. And they go together. One throws off a government, the other one builds one. One liberates, i.e. from England, the other one regulates. One defies rules, get out of here. King Charles, was it Charles? No, it was King. Anyway, one defies rule, the other imposes it. So, and then you've got this Constitution that's the longest living Constitution in the world. It has lived through Civil War, 2 World Wars, an agrarian society that went to an industrial society, and went through the Jet Age, the Information Age. I mean, it's gone through everything, and it's still here. And it's gone from a point where we only had 3.5 million people to where we have now, whatever the population of the United States is, 340 million. What a document. So I really I gave up the idea of studying U.S. history through the eyes of a Brit, and I switched, and I thought, no, I want to know, because who it was that influenced these guys that were our founding fathers. They were so well read, but they all read some of the same stuff. And that's where I got the idea of my own program. There was no class. I had a teacher. I met at her house every 2 to 3 days. It was at her house, never in a classroom. Nobody could ever do this again, by the way. Mm-hmm. And when I set this up, I had met her in England at Oxford, and I had 4 rules, four subjects. One is, can you teach me this stuff? Yes, I can do that. The second day I'm meeting with her, I said, I'm way too old to take tests and write papers. No problem. The third day I said, I love to read, but if I come in here on Monday and you tell me I got to read 7 books by Wednesday, I'll take Shakespeare. Because I really wanted the experience as well as being there. Oh, no, we'll take Shakespeare. We'll do some Shakespeare. And then I said, I don't have to read all the Wealth of Nations to know what Adam Smith says. And she said, we'll do bits. And I thought, bits are perfect. And you and I can debate. I'm older than my teacher. And sometimes her bits were 400 pages. But the real beauty was her husband taught the same stuff at Oxford at a different college. I'm with Jane talking about our bits. He's making dinner. I'll go over there 4:30 or 5, depending on how much we had to cover. I would then sit in their kitchen with him at dinner time. I wouldn't leave until 10 or 10:30. That was the most wonderfully intense experience I've ever had. And it can't be replicated. No test, no papers, no degree. I didn't care. I was there to learn about all the guys that It was Aristotle and Plato and Locke and Hume and Ricardo. I mean, it goes on and on. And it was fun, and she would tease me with stuff, and it was really terrific.
This episode of Invest Well, Be Well is brought to you by Main Management LLC, a pioneer in actively managed ETFs since 2002. Main Management starts with a clear fiduciary focus, delivering the transparency and personal attention you'd expect from a boutique firm. They provide financial advisors with solutions, not products. Main also believes investors should keep more of what they earn, emphasizing net of fee after-tax performance to help clients retain more of their returns. I've known Main Management for years. I've met thousands of managers over the course of my career, and one quality I really value: they invest alongside their clients. They eat their own cooking. Over 10% of the assets they manage are their own partner assets, and more than half of the firm are partners themselves. That says a lot. To learn more about Main strategies, including buy right hedged equity, U.S. sector rotation, thematic innovation, and all asset models, please visit their website at mainmgt.com. One of the themes of this interview has been the importance of continuous learning. So what advice would you give to younger professionals and investors, well, really any of us, about how to practically build that habit?
I mean, first of all, I go back and say the same thing. Not only do you read deeply. Pick some of these great books. I would say, Wealth of Nations, although there's parts you can skip. There's a whole thing on silver that goes on and on and on. Or M. Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments. Or my favorite how-to book is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Read that. But when I mean read it deeply. Go back. I mean, it's not easy to read. It's chewy. I can remember reading the first chapter about 10 times, thinking, "What the hell did he say?" So you got to dig in. So and you want to read some books that really have lasted throughout civilization, that had an impact on our world. So you read that, and then I guess I would follow guys like Jefferson or Ben Franklin or even Jack London. People would get up before the crack of dawn and read. I mean, if Jefferson, you can find this online. He's got all his points, but he would get up before the sunrise and read various things until noon. Jack London would write. He'd get up before the sunrise and he would write, and he would stop at noon. John Reed, who used to run Citibank, found that he needed to have a better whole life, and yet he had more and more responsibility in Citicorp. So what did he do? He dialed the time back when he would get up in the morning so he could get home in a normal time. But he was getting up at 4 a.m, so his day was about the same length, but it was just moderated differently or planned differently. That's what I would tell people. Read deeply. I mean, if you knew my daily schedule, you'd think all I do is read.
Pretty good advice. So you celebrated a big birthday recently. Happy birthday.
Yep.
And before you left for British Columbia, where you were celebrating, you wrote down some words of wisdom for your kids, which you called a baker's dozen. Yeah. Can you share a few highlights for us?
Well, again, it is a big birthday. I'm going to turn 80 in October. I tried to do something around my 80th birthday, but where I wanted to go, which was this Nemo Bay Resort, which is spectacularly beautiful, was not available in October. It was too cold up there. In any event, then I was getting close to it. I thought, well, this is a serious deal. Maybe I'll try to give some words of wisdom to my kids. And the only regret that I have is I only started doing this like 2 days before we took off. So it came out to 13 points, so I called it a baker's dozen. I might have added more if I had more time. I might have maybe combined some. I might have reprioritized the order, but essentially I got it all out there. And what I would do was, I'll give you an example. The very first one is the first rule of life. You got to show up, and I would describe something like, what does it mean to show up? And then I'd have 4 or 5 quotes under it in case my kids didn't believe that. So it wasn't just me saying it. And so I'll give you some of the other ones. It was embrace optimism. I'm a full believer of optimism, and I think about Colin Powell, who says you want to be a force multiplier. That's getting everybody together on the same page. Optimism does that. Be present. When you're talking to somebody, be present with them. It's respectful. You want to, and by the way, it's the old expression, we have two ears and one mouth. You want to listen. So be skeptical, not cynical, was another one. You've heard me say this now 3 or 4 times. Be a deep reader. Be prepared. There's that old expression, proper preparation prevents poor performance. They're the 5 P's. You got to be prepared for, if somebody's calling you for a meeting, why are they doing that? Think about that in advance. And that even goes for social things where you go into somebody's party. What do you think they're going to be talking about? Be prepared. Be realistic. Be resilient. Be resilient is one of the great things of all. And I'll give you guys a good example. One of my favorite teachers who's now passed on was a guy named Hank Ryling, I had at Columbia, but he went to Harvard. And he and I talked a lot. And he told me about a study called the termite study. And this was done, I think, back in the 40s. And they tracked people with Mensa-type IQ for many, many years. Clearly, they all had the mental capability to be really successful. Some were not. What was the determining factor? It was the resilient piece. If you get knocked over, you got to get up. It's the fire in the belly. That's what I mean by being resilient. You want to collect friends. Confucius say, man who has 1,000 friends can't afford to lose one. And, for a guy, it's kind of hard to collect friends sometimes because we used to do sports and you don't do sports as much, etc. But you still want to collect friends. You want to be generous for sure, and it doesn't matter. If you don't make a lot of money, that's all right. Give some. If you make a lot of money, give a lot more. And then you got to know when enough is enough. And the last one I said was, everybody knows this, but take the damn shot. It's how many times did Michael Jordan take the shot and miss? But everybody remembers the ones he made at the end of the game, or when Wayne Gretzky made the goal right at the end of the game. So those are my baker's dozen. By the way, in the middle of that, and this is where I hope my kids read it and think about it and live it. I had a question in the middle of it. Will you ever have a Pee Wee Reese moment? Outside of a baseball field in New York, it's in Brooklyn, is a statue. And the statue has Pee Wee Reese putting his hand on the shoulder of Jackie Robinson. When Jackie Robinson came up as the first black baseball player, even his teammates didn't want him there. When he'd go on the field, fans would throw stuff at him. They'd yell at him. And at one critical point, Pee Wee Reese put his hand on his shoulder. You hope with your kids they'll have that moment. Sorry. You hope that they have the Constitution to do the right thing. Sorry. That always gets me.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Pure gold.
So you've given us so much wisdom already, but I have one more question about the key to life, right? From your perspective, what is the key to, that if there is just one thing that you can think of, key to living not just wisely, but fully with meaning and balance?
I'm going to answer this 2 ways. I'm going to go to Aristotle's definition, and I'm going to do that in a second. But one of the things that I think that people should understand is how mankind has thrived already. In my lifetime, severe poverty has been cut from over 50% to less than 10%. I'm talking globally. Mm-hmm. In my lifetime, the ultimate productivity in life is longevity. So now people that live to 78, 80, I'm open to tack many more years on. But longevity has gone way up. In 1900, it was like 37 years was your life. How boring is that? We have really improved education. Some question we could do better, but literacy around the world has improved. Healthcare around the world has improved. We've expanded technology. There's all this amazing progress. I'll give you one data point which specifies the United States. Sometimes we whine too much. I look at a lot of data. And one of the things that makes life go round is median income. By the way, even Aristotle said, to do all the good things, you got to have some income. But the median income of Mississippi, the worst state of the 50, is greater than the UK. And it's closing in on Germany. We're doing okay. Now, can we do better? For sure. Now, to answer the second, where you were going with that last question, there's a term that, I'll go back again. Aristotle's book, Nicomachean Ethics, is probably one of the greatest books I've ever read. It was hard. Nicomachean, the reason it's Nicomachean is his son is Nicomacheus. And he believes in the one common thing that you always make every decision on, will it make me happy? That is a prime number. Will it make me happy? Well, the way you get to happiness, the term he uses is eudaimonia. The way you get there is through a virtuous life. And it's something that's iterative. You've got to work at it. And if you can achieve eudaimonia, it's the ability to look back on your life and say, it was a life well lived. I didn't rob, cheat, steal. You know how to get there, but you got to do it. He always is looking at the ultimate of a person, but he even describes it. The ultimate of an acorn is to become a full-grown oak tree, and it'll have its full treeness, so to speak. This is a container for water. We all know what that is, but it's fulfilling. If there's a hole in the bottom, it wouldn't have cupness. You want to have fullness, and that is eudaimonia, and that's where you want to head. And you know what you got to do to get there. I mean, that's where you want to get to, and that's where you want to be.
Well, I know one thing I have to do. The Aristotle book you referred to, it's to my left on a bookshelf, and I've owned it for 40 years, and I haven't read it yet. So it sounds like that's on my to-do list now.
I'll tell you one thing. When you pick that up, the very first sentence in there is fantastic. Even his first sentence in his metaphysics book, all mankind has the desire to know. What a sentence.
Yeah.
And Nicomachean Ethics, same thing. It's phenomenal first sentence. I mean, it just sets the whole tone. I mean, obviously, he was a good writer. Although you got to get chewy, you got to get used to the cadence and how he says stuff, and it's not easy. But once you get there, it's glorious.
Yeah, I find that way with Shakespeare. You got to read it for a bit, and then you find the groove, and then it just goes. Yeah.
So that's my next goal. For my 80th birthday, we'll see if this works. My teacher in Oxford's best friend is Anna Smith. She only happens to be the Shakespeare professor at Oxford, one of the great ones in the world. So I'm thinking now for my true 80th birthday, I'm heading back to London and to Oxford. I'm going to sit down with Jane and her husband Gervais and ask her to maybe, go to bat for me. No harm in asking. And if Anna Smith will do something somewhat similar that I had with my teacher, Jane Garnett, I'm going back, and I'll take Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I read them all a long time ago, but to sit down with the greatest teacher in the world on Shakespeare, wow.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity. Well, Dick, I have one of my last questions here, and it's something we ask all our guests, and that is about their physical wellness routine. So how they stay in shape and how they stay healthy. How do you do it?
Well, I'll give you that daily pattern. I get up in the morning, late at night and early in the morning. I'm always getting ready for a main management meeting, which we have every day. And you've listened to some of those. Yeah. After that meeting, then I collect a lot of stuff. Again, it's on Wall Street or other things I want to read. I collect them, and then I go to the gym. And I do that. I probably go to the gym. I like to average 7 days a week. It'll be between 5 and 7. Because I have fake knees and a fake hip, I'm relegated to machines. But so I do that, and then I know where every picnic table is in Sonoma. Go there and I read the stuff. And then I come home, and then I read some more. And then Steph and I might walk that vineyard you see behind me. And then she goes to do dinner, and then I come back in this office I'm sitting in, and I read some more. And then we have dinner together, and then we watch some stupid thing on TV, one of those series things. Then she goes to bed, and I used to say, I'm going to go see my dead guys or read my dead guide, and I go read some more. So that's the pattern. So that's how I stay in shape. Now, I wish I was in better shape, and I'm starting to try even different things. I mean, I know I'm, for my age, I'm in great shape. I mean, there's nothing wrong with me. But by the way, I am optimistic. And I mentioned all the things that have gone right. And think about the things that will happen to us. I'll give you one of the great books I read was by a guy named Andrew McAfee. GDP is getting lighter. How's that for a concept? Just as a concept. Why is that? Things like this. You can see my phone. Just a thing. Nobody's making camera boxes anymore. Inside there's a light, there's a GPS, there's all the stuff that we know that's in the phone. That's made GDP lighter. Even a Coke can has gone from 85 grams to, I think it's 15. There are 72 elements that the Geological Survey keeps track of. I think 69 of them we use less of per GDP than we did before. I have a hero by the guy, one of my true heroes. You've heard Aristotle. One of my true heroes is Julian Simon. Do you know who Julian Simon is? Julian Simon, when I tell you about him, you'll know him. There was a guy that wrote a book called The Population Bomb, Paul Ehrlich. He's 90. He's still saying the world's going to blow up because of population bombs. Well, guess what? Fertility rates are down. But anyway, he was very Malthusian. The planet is fixed. Population's going up. We're going to have a problem. And he even said that England, would basically almost, be gone by the year 1990 something. So he and Julian Simon made a very, very public bet. And Julian Simon said, you pick 5 elements. I can't remember the exact 5. It was like copper, tungsten, tin, and a couple of other ones. And he said, in 10 years, we'll look at this in real prices, and I'll bet you the prices will be down, not up. On a Malthusian basis, they should have been going up. They were down. And publicly, he had to write a check to him. Of course, he wrote it in discounted cash basis. But his whole deal is time price. In 1800, it took 8 hours of your time to afford 1 hour of reading light. Now you spend 1/3 of a second to afford 1 hour of reading light. I write a piece often at Thanksgiving, and I talk about the real price of a Thanksgiving dinner for 10. That number just goes down, 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 and the amount of time you work to afford that meal for 10 goes down. And there's a book called Superabundance by a guy, Marion Tupy, and he's got a co-author, and I'm blanking on it. And they measure 50 items. And since it's oranges to gold to wheat to you name it, it's 50 very varied items, and then they keep a thing on it, and everything is down in price per hour work to afford it. That's critical. Cars, you don't think about that. Cars are cheaper than where they've been. So why is that? So Julian Simon, who would have won, in my mind, a Nobel Prize, you got to be living to win a Nobel Prize, he would have won it. But the reason he said was he went against Ehrlich and ultimately Malthus is because of this right here. We can exchange, we can use less, we can invent different stuff. This is the greatest resource we have. And that's where he came up with that theory. And if you think about where we're going as a country, I mean, I like to use the piano. There's only 88 keys. But guess what? We never run out of songs because we're always, it's always a different combination of keys. Well, the reason technology works is we're reestablishing atoms and, reconstituting. And what's in front of us? AI. AI is going to be way bigger than the internet. Now, we'll have some Amara's Law in it. But another thing that's going to be way better is we're going toward nuclear, and we're actually getting close to fusion. I think we're going to have commercial fusion, not at a grand scale, but commercially in 2030. I mean, that's coming around the corner. I've been to the plant that's got it. It's a company called TAE, Trans Alpha Energy. They're already at 80 million degrees centigrade. They're building a machine now called Copernicus, which will be between 100 and 150 degrees centigrade. That's when it's commercial. By the way, at Oxford, I held Copernicus's book in my hands from 1543. Another thing, cannabis is all this stuff on medicine. I mean, all the, you now can sequence a genome. The cost of it's like flushing a toilet. It doesn't cost you anything. Because of that, I know Robert Kennedy's against mRNA, but mRNA, you could argue about whether it solved COVID or not. It certainly helped it, and it was done almost overnight. So what we can do one day off of that kind of stuff, I want to live to see it. It's going to be amazing. So I am so optimistic on where we're going. If people will open their eyes and just see things are getting better. Can we do better? Yes, but there's a lot of good stuff coming.
Well, I think that optimism was a great note to end on, and something I think we all need right now.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
You have to be able to hold more than one thought in your mind at the same time, and you have to think about the difference between noise and signal.
Yeah.
I want to know how you guys got together as a team for this.
Oh, that's a fun question. So, Robin, I'll let you take it first. It's been a while now.
Yeah, so let's see. My husband worked for a marketing company that used to be part of North Star Financial, which was the parent company of Orion and CLS Investments, where Rusty worked.
Oh.
And I remember I was there doing like a video project that I was just like the person reading the account, like updates or something like that. And Rusty came in and was talking about how he needed a writer. And I was like, I'm a writer. I can help you.
Yep. And we wrote a book together.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
you guys should get that.
It was called Higher Calling. It's a short read. Talking about, as a financial advisor, your higher calling is, of course, helping investors have good experiences, and just kind of walk through some of the experience I've had. And anyway, it's a short read. You can check it out for sure. It's still on Amazon. And then we've hosted over 300 podcasts, and then we decided we wanted to start this one that was a little more focused on, again, wiser investing and stronger living, and we've been really pleased with it so far. So our relation goes back at least 10 years now.
All right, I got another question. You guys might have to run, but I want to ask you another couple of questions.
Yeah.
What are your two, for the two of you, what's your favorite books?
My favorite book is Power of One by Bryce Courtney, South African story. That's where I'm from. So
you nailed that so fast.
That's my favorite. It's always been my favorite. I love that book. Great story.
No,
it's a hard question.
It is. I've liked so many books. I'm kind of at the stage where I feel like I need to start rereading books.
I can't do that. I can do that with stuff like Aristotle, because you got to keep going back to something like that. I can never read a book the second, if it's a regular book that's on the New York bestseller, I'll never read it the second time.
Yeah, there's that notion that you should read lots of books, which I get, and there's also the notion that you should also reread some of the great books, particularly as you get older, because you'll see them differently. You'll read them differently than you had. So I don't know if I can answer that question right now. I think the only book that I've read twice, but it's already been so long, and it's I don't think it really captures who I am now, but it definitely captured me at certain times, was Fountainhead by Ayn Rand.
Oh, yeah. I read that one twice.
Yeah. So, and it's a long one too. So that was my answer for many years.
Black and white. The characters are so black and white. There's no gray at all. I'll give you one. One of my second bucket list at Oxford was to meet a guy named Matt Ridley. And Matt studied at Oxford. Undergrad, he was a zoologist, and in grad school, he was a biologist. So he was a scientist. And by the way, he was taught by Richard Dawkins, who wrote that book, Selfish Gene.
Yeah.
Anyway, and recently he did a podcast with him where Matt, was the question asker. Anyway, Matt did not want to study. He did not want to be a scientist. He wanted to write about. So Robin, he wanted to be a writer about science. and he became the science editor of the Economist magazine. And then he later became the America's editor, the America's section of the Economist magazine. And now he's written 10 books. The first one of his I read, I really, if you want to get into optimism, his first book that I read was called The Rational Optimist. And, when I read it, I can pick out Aristotle and Smith because he studied them. I've read now 6 of his books. He is so well read, it's astounding. But if you listen to one of his podcasts, he'd start by saying, when I grew up, the ozone hole was getting bigger, deserts were getting larger, forests were getting smaller, sperm counts were going down. He would rattle off all this stuff, and then he said, what happened to it? We fixed it. The technology kind of fixed it. Now, and he's got a couple of really great phrases. One is, he thinks it'll be on his epitaph. Ideas have sex. Part of the notion we live on the shoulders of others. Well, it's not really what's inside our brain. It's what's between our brains that's really important. And he wrote another book on innovation. And you've got to have a free society to be really innovative. And there's a difference between an innovator and a inventor. For instance, a lot of people would say Edison invented the light bulb. No, he didn't. He invented the filament. And he did it 99 ways till he got a good one. And he famously said, I didn't fail 99 times. I figured out 99 times that it wouldn't work. And then, so he just invented a better way that pushed the light bulb into society at large. Another one like that is Watt. I always thought Watt invented the steam engine because, so Matt Ridley would go into that and he would take something like that and go backwards in time to figure out where it was coming from. Watt did not invent the steam engine. There were plenty of steam engines around, and they were at the bottom of coal mines in England where they had lots of energy, i.e. coal, but they had water down there and they had to get it the hell out of there. And so they had steam engines, but they were mono-purposed. And it was Watt that put it into the rest of life. And then he would, in a funny way, in a mocking way, there was a guy named, I think his last name was Lawton. I know his middle name was Pierpont. So he was linked to J.P. Morgan. He was the head of the Smithsonian Institute. And in the early 1900s, he was supposed to be the guy that invented the airplane. He had all the money, he had all the prestige, he had all the contacts, but he was so close-minded he wouldn't talk to anybody because he was so egomaniac type that he wanted to do it all himself. But who did it better? 2 bicycle mechanics. They would go out with all kinds of crap because they knew they were going to crash 15 times that day, and they would talk to everybody, and they did it. I mean, that's the kind of stuff he's a wonderful writer. He's about 6'5", and he became a lord. And then he gave that up because he couldn't have enough influence on what was going on. But he's a fabulous writer. He's really an evolutionary biologist. He's also written a book called The Evolution of Everything. I mean, that's quite sick. But if I had to recommend one that's a fun read, I think it's a fun read was Rational Optimist.
I think we need a book list.
Written in 2010, and it you don't even have to read the book. You can just go on. He is on so many podcasts. It's unbelievable. And his son went to Oxford as well, and a friend of mine knew him as a student and said, oh my God, not only did he get ones, the highest marks, he may have had the highest marks in all of Oxford. And his son's not only got a PhD, but he's got post-PhD. And I took him to dinner here in San Francisco at the PU Club. And now, God bless him, his son is a teacher. And his son is Matthew Ridley the 9th. The one I'm talking about is the 8th. And if you guys, if you've been to England, I presume you've been to London, right?
Yeah.
You know the parade grounds that, at the one end is Buckingham Palace.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very back, along, if you're at the very back and you're looking toward the Buckingham Palace, on the right-hand side is Whitehall, which is where all the government is. But right at the back, there's a stairway up and there's an obelisk there. And my guess is if you've been anywhere near there, you walked up those stairs. the obelisk was given to that spot by his grandfather, and his family house was on the right. And I'm pretty sure that's where Charles and Camilla lived before he became king. They gave that house up to the government, and he lived someplace up in northeast England. Fascinating guy. I'm trying to get him to speak at the Sonoma Authors Festival, so he'll come and he'll stay with me here in Sonoma. So there's my book report for you.
Yeah, well, don't you think we need a book recommendations list, Rusty, to get put in the show notes from here?
And that's a good one.
Yeah. No, indeed.
I know I want one just for myself.
Yeah. And well, you've already donated. Power of One.
I know. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, Dick, this has been such a treat having you on the show. This is such a great conversation. You've given us so much to think about and so many words of wisdom, which we appreciate. Before we let you go, can you tell us where advisors can follow your work and continue learning from you?
Well, I'm at Main Management. So, and Rusty's now the head of our advisory board. So I'm there, and I don't have I don't write stuff for publication. So and I don't go on any of the things that you would follow me by. So I'm pretty boring on that one.
You don't have to publish a baker's dozen on a blog somewhere.
Well,
great idea. Great idea.
Yeah.
So, of course, Maine is a sponsor, of course, of this podcast, and the website is mainmgt, as in mainmanagement.com. So that's a good place to go for all things Maine management. So, Dick, this has been great. There's been so many words of wisdom here. And one other thought I had is, I know you're a wine guy, but you did kind of talk about how you're sort of it sounds like a slightly frustrated bartender. I'm a bourbon guy. I'd love to see how you make a mid-julep or whiskey sour sometime.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to say I would like to have been a bartender, because that would have been a great way to meet single girls when I was thinking. I wouldn't even know how to make, I'm a wine drinker.
Yeah, okay.
I remember the last time I had hard liquor. Although actually I was in Nemo Bay where I took my kids.
Yeah. All right. I'll drink some wine, I guess.
Yeah. I can help you with California wine.
Well, great. Well, thank you again for your time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye, you guys. Thank you with you. It was fun.
Great to meet you.
You too. Thanks a lot.
See you, Dick.
All right. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to Invest Well, Be Well. Let us know what you think. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. This podcast is hosted by Rusty Vanneman and Robin Murray and produced by Garrett Crosby. Well, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to Invest Well, Be Well. And hey, if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe.
If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or just want to connect, please visit my website, rustysbridge.com, or email me directly at rusty@rustysbridge.com. Until next time, invest well and be well. This episode of Invest Well, Be Well is brought to you by Bonrian Capital, led by my friend and colleague of nearly 10 years, Shana Sissel. Shana was named a top 20 wealth tech CEO in 2025, and it's no surprise. She's passionate, does the work, and knows asset managers, portfolio allocations, and alternatives like few others in the business. She's authentic, tough, and deeply cares about all her stakeholders, the kind of character you'd expect from the daughter of a police officer. If you want an investment manager who combines deep due diligence with innovative solutions and alternative investments, please check out Bonrian Capital at bonriancapital.com.